at a time, yeah? Okay, so guys, thank you and girls, thank you for joining in. Special welcome also to Richard and Dave and Knut, who have come along to listen in on this. They're kind of familiar with some of the processes that I'll talk about. So their income is, their input is more than welcome. Freudian slip with the income there. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide, please. One click. So that's me. That's my little company. Basically, I've worked quite a bit on figuring out what well depth is, trying to figure out what uncertainty of well depth is. And it took me a long time to make that transition. But in the end, I found out it's more important to know how much the plus and minus is rather than what the actual number is. Many, many years ago, I got stopped by a policeman who wanted to give me a speeding ticket for something over 100 miles an hour. And it kind of occurred to me at the time, well, what if he was 10% wrong or 5% wrong or 2% wrong? How would that affect the fine? And that kind of makes you think to yourself, uncertainty is kind of important. It made absolutely no difference to the judge, and I had to pay. Anyway, next slide, please. So here you've done two things at once. The point is that in the vision and in the vision and in the mission, we talk about estimates, and we talk about this formula, which is the, I think everyone would agree is the basic statement on how we come up with reserves. And it's made up of gross volume, it's made up of net to gross, porosity, water saturation, and stock tank conversion. But the point is that we're focused on what these numbers are, and these numbers are what give us the reserves in place. But as is said here, it's an estimate. One click, please. And that estimate is coming in because we don't have uncertainty as part of the equation. Now, the International Standards Organization has defined measurement as being a value with an associated uncertainty. And without that associated uncertainty, the value is essentially an estimate. So for all the goodness of all the hard work we do on this equation, we're essentially dealing with an estimate. And this estimate is essentially part of the mandate that the Hydrocarbon Reserve Special Interest Group has. So the question is, do we actually want to know what the uncertainty is? Next slide, please. So what we're going to have a look at is this what I'm going to talk about? Is this a viable reserves and resources uncertainty model? Is it something we can get our head around? And then is it something that's worth pursuing? I have all these really good ideas, but most times people are not really that interested in it. And we have to make up our mind as a group. Is this something that we actually want to do anything with? And last but not least, who's willing to help? I'm more than happy to charge around on my white horse into the sunset, but doing it all alone is a little bit soul defeating. So I am looking for people who are prepared to pick this up with me and do something about it. Okay, one click, please. So the first thing we're going to talk about is subsurface positional uncertainty, and specifically well depth. One click, please. And here you see that vertical depth affects the gross volume it affects the net to gross. It kind of has something to do with porosity, but we're not really sure about that. And saturation, kind of, but again, it's not definitive. Next, one click, please. And bulk volume is a constant, which we're not really, that's not really associated with dimensions. One click, please. And that means that we find that vertical depth directly affects 2 of these 5 parameters and indirectly affects another 2. So basically, you can say that vertical depth, for everything that we might sniff at, actually is a significant effect on this equation. One click, please. So if we look at the sources of uncertainty, then they come from various sources. And when we talk about gross volume, we're talking about the seismic area as it's defined, and we're talking about the vertical height as it's defined. The seismic comes from the seismic, and the vertical height comes basically from drilling. Now, you can say, it comes from wireline, All right, then it comes from wireline. Fine. But it comes from a long hole depth determination turned into vertical height. And then we talk about the net to gross, the porosity, and the saturations. And the uncertainties of these are not really very well described in the literature. Tice has gone into it in quite a lot of detail, or he's created some very credible explanations of how these uncertainties are derived. And myself and Tice have talked about the effect of, in particular, well depth uncertainty on petrophysical interpretation validity. So there are sources of information available there, and these can indeed be found and used. For the stock conversion factors, there's not really a lot that I could find anyway that talks about this. And I would presume that's obviously it's not a number without uncertainty, but I think it's more or less accepted as is. One click, please. So when we look at the equation, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the gross volume. We're dealing with the net height and the gross height. We're dealing with the porosity. We're dealing with the saturation that we're dealing, the saturation of the fluid phase that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with the conversion factor of the volume in the subsurface to the volume at surface. And this equation is the basic equation that we deal with. Now, others will have more complex interpretations of this equation. Others will have it refined X, Y, and Z, but it comes down to the same basic relationships. And I think this equation forms the basis of what the hydrocarbon resources special interest group talks about. One click, please. And then if we go ahead and resolve that equation into uncertainties, we come up with the following relationship. So the ratio of the reserves in place to the calculated in place is the uncertainty of the volume. That's what the U is all about. To the gross volume, the uncertainty of the sand count, or call it what you will, the net to a gross, to the actual net to gross, and so forth across the equation. And you can see there, one click, please. You can see there that the gross volume is actually made up of the area plus the vertical height uncertainties. And in that respect, we find that the vertical height uncertainty has a direct influence on the volume uncertainty, and that volume uncertainty has a direct effect on the reserves in place uncertainty. And later in the presentation, we'll be seeing how dramatic this becomes as the reservoirs get thinner. So usually uncertainties we talk about to 1 sigma, and folk can say, oh, well, we talk to 2 sigma, we talk to 2.88 sigma, blah, blah, blah. Well, fine, yeah, okay, do that. It doesn't change the equation. It doesn't change the relationship. Okay, 1 click, please. So here we have the equation as we've discussed. And what I'd like to talk about now, just for a moment, is the dimensional aspect of that. And what do I mean by that? Well, the equation as we see it there is basically a bunch of numbers that we put into the square root, and we think that we have it sorted. But in actual fact, there is a 3-dimensional component that varies according to each one of these contributors. One click, please. So the first 3-dimensional component we talk about is the volume, which is, as discussed, is the area times the vertical height. Yeah. And that area is indeed the length times the breadth. That it's as simple as that. And again, depending upon the geometry, it gets more complex, etc., but it doesn't change the basic premise behind the argument. 1 click, please. When we talk about gross to net ratio, it's not quite sure. Is this something that's derived as vertical? Do we see this as a vertical component, or is it coming from cores, which are, it's not quite clear where this is actually coming from. Is it coming from log results? Has it been turned into vertical? It's not quite sure. So I've kind of left a dotted line around that. 1 click, please. But for sure, we see that porosity and water saturation will be dependent on the well orientation. And you can imagine that the vertical component of a horizontal well gives a 0 result for the contribution to a reservoir in terms of the vertical component. So we need to have a think about the well orientation and how that affects the dimensionality of the 3D equation that we're looking at. 1 click, please. That then leads us to the stock conversion, and that is basically dimensionless. We can consider that to be a constant. 1 click, please. And that leaves us again with the net to gross that might be derived from well logs, or it might not, where it really depends. 1 click, please. But in any case, we definitely do have the situation where the vertical, the length, and the breadth uncertainties contribute to the gross volume uncertainty. 1 click, please. So this idea of the dimensionality of the components, I don't know how much people have thought about this, and I don't know how much it's part of anyone's agenda. But it does seem to me that we do have to make sure that when we're talking about, for example, a porosity uncertainty, that it's valid across the same dimensions as, for example, the gross to a net ratio, as as is it valid to the volume. That's just something that I throw a ball up and say, have we actually got this right? One click, please. So if we deal with a reservoir, and let's say we've got a really wonderful looking reservoir here, and I can see here that the conversion of the fonts hasn't come across very well. But we can see here that we've got gas and oil and water, and we've got a gas-oil contact. We've got an oil-water contact somewhere in there. We've drilled a vertical well. We've drilled a deviated well. And each of these wells has got a certain uncertainty associated with where the position is. And when we look at this in terms of cell block height, and when we develop our argument regarding the quantification of the reservoir, we can already see that there's a bit of an issue here, because if our uncertainties are bigger than our cell blocks, it becomes a little bit iffy to go ahead and make a quantification of what the cell characteristics are if the uncertainty of where those measurements are bigger than the cell itself. So this is something, again, I think we should be aware of and make sure that we understand what the ramifications are. The numbers are what the numbers are. We're not going to change the numbers, but we are going to change our understanding of the confidence we have in what the numbers represent. One click, please. So if we go over to a better management of our three-dimensional uncertainty, we come up with the issue that we now have values that we can more confidently assign to any particular cell. So now we're pretty sure that our oil-water contact is within the cell that what we think the wellbore represents. One click, please. So, oh, this is a shame. This is not what I want to show. But what this actually means is that if we go from the graph on the left that shows uncertainties which are fairly large, and we have a P10 and a P90 evaluation of the oil column, then we can see it's quite different to that on the right, where the P10 and the P90 show a much tighter and hence more confident assessment of essentially a bigger oil column. So what we're saying here is that if we set our requirements for uncertainties, then we're able to calculate more confidently, but also arrive at bigger volumes for our reserves. Next, one click, please. So here we have a situation where we're going to apply our equation into our little reservoir. One click, please. And in that case, we're going to have a gross volume being determined by 2 times 4 kilometers, and I've said plus minus 100 meter for a lack of a better number. Sound count ratio of 0.8 plus minus 0.05 and so forth. Now, these numbers can be anything, and they can be anything which your reservoir defines. And the uncertainties can also be anything, essentially. But the fact that you have those numbers there means that you can now go ahead and define what it means if you mess around with the uncertainties. One click, please. And so what we're going to do is look at what happens to the reserves with different vertical height values and simultaneously different vertical height uncertainties. One click, please. So, well, this is great. So what we're going to talk about is an oil column, and you see all the little red squares there. That basically means the formation vertical oil height, and beneath it, the formation vertical oil height uncertainty. So we've got a given vertical height that we've defined, and now we're going to have a vertical uncertainty that is associated with that number. And what we're going to do is look at the effect of varying that vertical height and the vertical height uncertainty. Click, please. So here we have our basic equation, and we're all familiar with that. And now we're going to look at the reservoir vertical height, and that arrives at a volume. And we'll see what that volume is with different vertical heights. And then we're going to look at what happens to the P90 difference as we go from a vertical height uncertainty of plus minus 2, just taking a number, to plus minus 1. And then going from plus minus 1 to plus minus 0.5. And then really sharpening up our pencils and going from vertical height uncertainty of 0.5 to 0.2. And this gives us a change in the reserves as we go from 2 to 1, from 2 to 0.5, and from 2 to 0.02. One click, please. So we're going to keep the parameters constant of net to gross, of porosity, of water saturation, and of a stock conversion factor. One click, please. We're going to keep the area constant, that 2.2 times 4 kilometers. One click, please. And we're going to vary the vertical height together with the vertical height uncertainty. One click, please. And that means for a 100-meter reservoir, vertical column would have 61 million cube. Thank you very much. And that will give us a P10 to P90 difference of 77,000, 19,000, and 5,000, increasing as we make the specifications for the vertical height tighter. And you can see there the increase in the reserves. It basically goes from 0.13 to 0.17. Now, that won't really break the bank. That there are many, many more uncertainties that are much higher than just this number. But we're going to see how this affects, how this changes as the reservoir becomes thinner. One click, please. When we go to 50 vertical height, we see half the reservoir reserves of volume. That makes sense. But now we see the P10 to P90 difference actually increasing. And the reason it increases is because, remembering back to the slide with the mountain showing the P10 to P90 difference left and right, when we change that vertical height, we change the ratio of the effect of the uncertainty on the reserves. And that's what you see here. So as we half the height of the vertical reservoir, we more or less double the difference that it makes in the reserves by simply the way that those numbers work out. And you can see now on the percentages that they start to become almost something to think about. Nothing to write home about, but certainly to be aware of. One click, please. If we now look at a 20-meter reservoir height, sure enough, we've got a fifth of over the volume. But now look at what's happening to the effect on the reserves based on the uncertainty of the vertical height. It starts to become quite a bit. And now we're talking about whole percentage numbers. And these numbers are ones that you perhaps might want to scratch your head about and say, that's definitely worth my paycheck to do something about it. One click, please. So when we talk about a 10-meter reservoir, which is probably something that a lot of us are looking at these days, we see sure enough we're dealing with a much smaller reservoir volume, but we can now see that there's a very distinct increase in our reserves in place based on the fact that we're simply being more accurate. We haven't changed the numbers. We're simply being more accurate with what that vertical height number represents. Now, again, you can argue yourself left and right, the number this, the number that, but it doesn't change the basic premise of the argument. These kind of relationship, I believe, are one of the reasons why in our industry we tend to think of big reservoirs and it doesn't matter what the depth is. Well, this is the reason. This is the reason why. Because we think of big reservoirs and it doesn't matter what the depth accuracy is, and you can see that. But if we take that same attitude and use it in a thin reservoir, you can see what we're leaving on the table. And I do believe that this is the case. One click, please. So, in other words, this means that both the vertical height and the vertical height uncertainty have a major effect on reserves calculation, and this specifically in thinner reservoirs. One click, please. So we're now going to look at how these actually graph out. One click, please. Wrong direction. There you go. Here we see the effect on reserves in percent going from 2 to 1 meter uncertainty. So you could say that 2 meters uncertainty in this case would be the default. You know, you kind of shut your eyes and hope that the drill is right. To 1 meter where you kind of half pay attention to it and make sure he's counting the number of pipes right. That's the kind of difference that you're looking at. One click, please. And again, there we go. And here we look at the difference going from 2 to 0.5. And you can see there a shift of everything to the right as our reserves increase, as we become more accurate in our vertical dimension uncertainty. One click, please. And again, yeah, but it doesn't go on for forever. You see here now graphically that these effects actually are subject to what's called diminishing return. You can't go on ad infinitum becoming more and more accurate, thinking you're going to get better and better results. But we will see how this translates into money. One click, please. So this is what managers understand. You'll see there the little numbers on the top in red. One click, please. These are actually increase in asset value in millions of dollars. Now, managers understand millions of dollars. They don't necessarily understand all the numbers that we discuss within this formula. But this top line they do understand. Click, please. And here we see the effect of going from 2 to 1. One click, please. From 2 to 0.5. One click, please. And from 2 to 0.2. Now, as petrophysicists, we all talk about chart divisions. I'd like you to look at the chart divisions in the top right. In the top right, there are 2, maybe 2.5 chart divisions difference. If you look all the way at the bottom left, you'll see it's maybe 1.5 chart divisions. So in other words, in our big reservoir, we can do all the uncertainty, fancy stuff we like, but actually the biggest effect we get in the small reservoirs when we really tighten up on what it is that we're measuring and the effect that uncertainty has on reservoir volumes. One click, please. So one way to go around this is we may actually be able to do this very easily. And we don't have to think about big, expensive wells where it's all very critical. We can actually do it very easily using workovers. On workovers, if we measure the pipe properly, we can very easily reevaluate the accuracy of the geological model and hence the reservoir model. And we can do this low risk, low cost, and with a very high return, as you can see in the graph above. So it's not something that necessarily has to be a big ticket item in how things are done, but it can actually be done in the background, really on a routine basis, just updating the models and creating reserves that otherwise are essentially bypassed. Click, please. So I have 5 quick questions after me rattling away. And the first is, do we as a group think that we actually have within the mandate of the Hydrocarbon Resources Special Interest Group, do we actually have the mandate to include an uncertainty model? In our vision and in our mission, it's not included. So we might think it's included, but actually it's not. So we need to think about that, or need to. I would suggest thinking about that. One click, please. We have to say, is this reserves model that I've come up with something that's worth pursuing? Is this something that we should be going after, or is that Harold Bolton will allow him to roll off into the sunset on his rather small white horse? I think it is something that's worth pursuing, and I certainly haven't seen anyone else discussing this in a way that takes into account particularly the dimensional aspect of the equation. One click, please. There is an immediate market. We can use workovers to increase existing value. I think that's pretty clear. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It's something that can be done in the background. And I think it can make a big difference to reservoirs where there have been questions and no one's quite sure. And we can add value. I'm pretty sure about that. One click, please. So who wants to get involved? You know, I've said before, I'm more than happy to get out and crack the whip on this one, but I don't want to do it alone. I'll just be frank with you on that. So I am looking for people who are prepared to support developing this argument, getting examples, and making sure it becomes something which is which is worthwhile pursuing. One click, please. And is this a paper opportunity for Dubai at the SPWLA in May? I've got a request, like everyone does, for abstracts, and if we can say yes to the things above here, I don't see why we can't put a paper together that would seriously make sense. So that ends my my introduction, and I'd like to open the floor to people who have got experience in what I've been rabbiting on about, people who are perhaps skeptical, other people who are wildly enthusiastic. What do we do from here? Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll go first. So, great presentation. I really appreciate the insights into it. And as far as your kind of first question is this something that we need to be considering as part of our mandate? And I guess my opinion is definitely a firm yes. I've actually been in the position in unit or in a redetermination where depth uncertainty made a very significant change in the outcome between the two parties. And so quantifying that uncertainty, I think, is something that people don't give enough consideration to, but it is something that's really important. And one of the workflows I also see where uncertainty and depth really comes into play a lot is doing MDT gradient analysis and trying to kind of make remarks on the observations and changes in pressure gradients and such. And positional uncertainty can make the difference between determining if two reservoirs are in hydraulic communication or not. So I definitely think it's something that is very worthwhile in pursuing. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your experience or kind of thoughts around quantifying the uncertainty between driller's depth and log depth?
Well, what exactly is your question there? I'm sorry.
So, kind of one of the things that frequently presents itself as an issue is resolving the difference between driller's depth and logger's depth in terms of depth uncertainty. And so there's kind of different feelings on which one is more accurate, or how do you quantify which one you should use in a particular situation. I know you were highlighting a lot of the positional aspects in terms of kind of, I'm assuming that's primarily related to kind of that XYZ space. But what about kind of that driller's depth versus logger's depth in directional or deviated wells?
Yeah, the argument of driller's depth versus logger's depth, and which is the best and the most important, and et cetera, is usually coming down to the driller's budget. It has nothing to do with the numbers. He's got the biggest budget, so he wins the argument. Now, the real answer to that question is, what are the requirements for the accuracy that is purported to be reported? So the real argument is not which is the most accurate. The argument is, what is the relevant uncertainty that has to be met? Now, if you're at 10,000 feet and you've got 10,000 feet of drill pipe and 10,000 feet of wireline in the well, who's to say which is the most accurate? The important thing is the uncertainty of the value that's presented. And if the uncertainty of the driller's pipe depth is plus minus 50 foot, then that tells you it's plus minus 50. If wireline comes along and says, well, actually, we're plus minus 35, then the answer is wireline is more accurate. But if the operator says, well, really, I don't care, it's plus minus 60 foot is fine to me, then it doesn't matter. It makes no difference whatsoever. So the answer to that question is really, what is the operator's requirement for a long hole depth uncertainty? Now, a long hole depth is the first parameter that translates into position. I've spoken about positional uncertainty, but positional uncertainty is 100% dependent on a long hole depth. So the long hole depth is the driver behind the positional uncertainty. That positional uncertainty is affected indeed by azimuth, inclination, and the calculation model components. But the driver behind those uncertainties is the well depth.
Thanks. So one of the things that kind of in the reserve space frequently happens, and there's often, at least what comes through to my end, is a lack of information around that uncertainty, particularly in the driller's depth. Wireline will get some of the log data, and a lot of times the service companies will be providing some information that kind of helps us kind of get a better understanding around that uncertainty. Plus, we do get tools that kind of help us indicate where there's issues with logging depth. We get tension poles and all of those kind of things. Right? A lot of times that
Brett, your reception is not very, very good.
Sorry about that. I'm in the car in a rainstorm here. So, do you have any? Is there a well-published kind of uncertainty model around the driller's depth uncertainty?
Yes, for sure. see in my book.
Yeah, I took a screenshot of the cover so I could get a hold of it.
Yeah, no, there are a number of authors of uncertainty models for drill pipe. Unfortunately, most of those models have got flaws in them that don't necessarily end up with something that's representative of actual operating conditions that people are dealing with. The thing is that with driller's depth, you really do have to take into account this effect of the secondary parameters. Most importantly being the temperature profile and the surface hook load profile. If you head and make assumptions, then you end up with uncertainties on the end results, on the correction results, which are as high as the corrections themselves, in which case you might well as not have made the correction. So the issue with driller's depth, as also with wireline depth, is that you have to take care of the measurement process as well as the secondary parameters, as well as the model that's used to create the actual value. Now, unfortunately, most of that information dissolves and is gone by the time it becomes important. You know, most of that information is no longer there when you get around to doing your reserves evaluation. And so you're left with the default measured depth value that comes away from the well site. And this is why operators, and I keep throwing mud at the wall on this one, But this is why operators really, really, really have to put a flag in the sand and say, guys, we want to have plus minus 10 feet at 10,000 or whatever the number is in order to make our model make sense. And then it's up to the service companies to show how they actually produce that required uncertainty.
I think that was really insightful.
We still have time for more questions.
Those of you who are operators out there, what's your feeling?
Hi, Harold. This is Melanie with Netherlands Tool. I don't work for an operator. We're a reserve consultant, but we definitely look at geologic uncertainty when we're doing reserve assessments or resource assessments. So I think that a lot of that gross rock volume uncertainty is captured, maybe not necessarily well depth, but just geologic uncertainty as a whole when we're doing, especially probabilistic or early on reserve and resource assessments. And I think that's kind of where this kind of falls, is like a geometry uncertainty. Personally, after kind of watching, I see where the value in positioning uncertainty and kind of defining that and getting a handle on that, especially if there's big discrepancies between data. But definitely when we do probabilistic uncertainty, we look at gross rock volume uncertainty as one of the parameters.
Yeah, thanks. And the important thing, the message that I have for you there is that volumetric uncertainty to a large extent is being defined by the well which is drilled, certainly in terms of the reservoir, and that's what those graphs were getting at. If we're more accurate with the process that defines the long hole depth and hence the vertical depth, we're going to end up with more reserves. It's as simple as that. And that graph I showed there with the dollars, that gives you an idea as to what's being left on the table. 2 chart divisions on that graph is worth more than today's expense account.
Yes, certainly. And definitely, as you know, just coming from the reserve consulting world, as we add data to our evaluation, you know, if you had 2 log runs from one well in a field, LWD and wireline, and they both come in pretty close, and then maybe you got MDT data and it's showing the same contact as the logs, and you know, you have a pretty good handle and confidence in your depth. But you know, if you've got variations in those, and I've definitely seen that, maybe drilling under a big salt dome or something unusual happening in directional, you know, highly deviated wells and big discrepancies in all of your depth estimates, then having you know, higher gross rock volume uncertainty or net to gross uncertainty, you know, when you're doing your reserve evaluation. But I mean, it makes sense. I just feel like it could be more of like a, I don't know if it's necessarily petrophysical or geologic, but I mean, they're intertwined. So, you know, in terms of you're talking like maybe PRS, PRMS.
Yeah, the driver behind the equations that we looked at just now are essentially petrophysical. We have the seismic area, and then the rest it's more or less coming from logs and drilling results. Now, in terms of the geological effect of well positioning, that's huge. And if you have a plus minus 50-foot uncertainty from one well to the next, then you can quite easily shift a reservoir or put a fault in a reservoir where it's absolutely not needed. Or perhaps it is needed and you never realized it. But if you put your uncertainties down to 10 foot, it becomes a lot clearer what those numbers mean. And that applies equally well, at least as much, to the geological models.
Yep, agreed. Definitely. Question for you though, Harold. In your book, do you? I've taken a screen grab and it was in the process of purchasing it, but I haven't looked through it. Are there details on like what we were talking about earlier, uncertainties associated with the different loggers and drillers steps, and maybe the different types of measurements and bracketing sort of those uncertainties?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Any more questions? We still have a few minutes for. And we will share the link for those of you that don't know the link for the book that Harold published, so that you can look into more details. I'm guessing, in addition to some of the examples that we have seen here today, we also have some additional details that for time reasons he couldn't cover in his presentation today, but you can look into more details in his book that has a lot of concepts and review some of the basic stuff that we cover, but also additional information that it will be very useful for you as a reference and for applying in your work.
Do we, as a special interest group, are we able to do something with this model? Or is this something that we should?
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah. We, as a special interest group, we have a a workshop that we usually teach during the annual conference. We taught that 2 years in a row. This year we didn't include it in the workshop, but the plan is to update the workshop content to include some stuff that we already see for as SMRS, in addition to the PNMS topics that we cover. The idea is we could also incorporate this stuff into that, or at least, be able to expand a little bit more during the workshop, where we usually have 8 hours. Usually it's a Saturday or Sunday, it's a one-day workshop. During that time, we can also expand on this topic. In addition to that, the plan is to have some especially focused sessions on some basic stuff that we have more interest, like and the idea is that the special interest groups lead the effort to have these special focus sessions. So last year, we tried to put together some proposals, not only the hydrocarbon reserves special interest group, but all the rest of the special interest groups that we have in the SPWLA. So at the end, based on the number of submissions, we organize these especially focused sessions. They are supposed to contain papers that are gonna be focused on the topics that we have. So next year, the idea is to also propose one, and for that we can either do a regular submission to that special focus session, and then if we have enough abstracts accepted, then we can have a specially focused section like we had this year for production surveillance or for NMR or for any other topics. So even if the abstract is not accepted, for example, you're proposing an abstract or a paper on this topic, I think that is very valid and very is worth it to pursue that opportunity. If we go ahead and do that, for some reason, let's say only your abstract is accepted and the rest of the abstracts proposed for that, especially focus section, are not, we can still move forward with your abstract, moving it to another session. So it's something that we can also do. So not only during the workshop, but also during the technical sessions for the annual conference. So I think that is worth it to pursue this opportunity.
Okay, and the thing that most people will remain absolutely silent and pull their heads on, and who's prepared to stick their finger up and say, I'll contribute.
Well, I think that all of us in the steering board of the special interest group are willing to do that. I mean, I know that Joshua, I don't want to speak for anybody. I know that I would be interested, but I know that Joshua and the rest of the team that we have in the steering board for the special interest group in hydrocarbon reserves would be interested in working on this with you. So yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, Herod, and this is Joshua. Yeah, I mean, I think there are aspects we need to realize. I mean, most of people in interest groups, as you understand, they're all volunteers. So there is the interest from the discipline point of view. There is interest from people who wants to help push this, but also there are also challenges with each person. I mean, timing, the period of time. I think some of the special interest group members just spent quite a lot of time, some years, working on the SP contribution. So it's something that you also have to keep in mind. It's very difficult to just set out and say, look, we'll work on this month or work on this next month. So there are people who have interest, and also, apart from those on the steering committee, we request others who are interested to join and say, because that will make things much easier for others, because a few people have been really carrying the load for quite some time. So I think what we can go forward from this presentation is those who are interested, they can indicate, and then we can have off sessions working with you. But it's going to be, I mean, let's be realistic. For somebody to say, today I volunteered to do that, because they may have other commitments and interests. But I think in principle, you can see that the attendance to your presentation was much more than most other presentations, shows the interest people have on this topic.
Yeah, and now I appreciate that, and that's correct, and that's why I'm now looking for a conversion of that into concrete expressions of interest, so that I can, or we can put together a a scope of operation for a potential paper.
Yeah, I think what we can do as an action point, I mean, if anyone here has looked through their schedule and they are keen on volunteering right now, I mean, that would be good. And what we could set a time, maybe within this month or next month, we set a deadline and says, look, those who are interested, please respond. And then we can work among ourselves and set up a group of people to work with you on this topic. I mean, for a lot of people in the consulting, we're coming to year end. It's not a very good time. I must be very blunt with you. Most people are going to be working late into the night, year end reserves. So it's not a very, very good time for most of people year end. Normally, if we had done this around March, summertime is a little bit easier, but I'm just being open. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also have to keep in mind that the deadline for abstracts is approaching. I think that is end of September or something like that. So if we want to have something submitted, we need to have it ready before the end of the month. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Yeah, if we are interested in going ahead with this.
Yeah, well, that's why, for exactly that the reason I'm kind of looking for actual names for people who are interested in contributing to this. You know, whether it be from a petrophysical perspective, a geological, a reserves, a operator perspective. You know, the more the merrier. But I also want to see it focused so that we are able to get the deadlines met.
Yeah, just to I'm just gonna share a little bit here so you can see the this is the deadline or the timeline that we have for the SPWLA according to the BPE technology. So the call for abstract was open already in July, and then yeah, we have until the end of this month. So all the abstract, they already manifested that there won't be any extension. So everything has to be submitted by the end of this month, and then early December, you will be notified, and then you will have to have the manuscript. If accepted, you will have to have your manuscript prepared early March, and then presentations mid-April for the symposium happening in mid-May. So that's something that we need to keep in mind if we are going forward with that.
Javier, it just occurred to me, I wonder what the y-axis is on that graph.
Oh, sorry. I guess I don't know. I guess it's yeah, this yeah, I guess
Anyway, that's
probably the days between or no, because this is flat. Yeah. I'm guessing it's probably the pressure that you will have as an author. Once you get accepted, you have more pressure to have everything ready for this time. So I'm guessing that's the pressure. But
anyway,
yeah, it's something good to keep in mind.
If we I think people have got my email address. So I would say by the end of the week, that Wednesday now, so by the end of this coming week, if people can express their interest, then I'll be happy to start doing the infantry work on developing an abstract. But the abstract has to reflect the interests of the participants. So I would say by this time next week, let's say Wednesday next week, if we can have people simply saying yay or nay with a couple of notes on what they want to get out of it, then that will be enough to get an abstract up and running.
Yeah, one thing that we can do, for example, is just to go ahead and follow up with we have the emails of the participants, so we can just with that we can just contact each individual and then or send just a survey. And those interested just need to reply yes or not. And then those that are interested just follow up. We will have share your contact information and then we can follow up with that. Yeah, I think that's something that can be easily done very quickly.
Okay.
What do you think, Joshua?
Yeah, I think, as you said, by the end of this week, anyone on this call who is interested in joining as a co-author for the paper should just reach out to you, and then you can draft a framework for the abstract, share with those people, and then you can work with them, and in order to meet the deadline, so that we don't keep people here on this call. Yeah, I think that's the best thing to do.
Yeah. And before we leave, if you don't mind, and if you have your camera available, can you turn it on so we can take a quick picture for the for the SPWLA Today newsletter?
Oh,
Nice window, Mr. Phil.
Got the good desk today.
Yeah, I like it. I think that Dave, oh, Melanie has no camera. I think that Dave Mercer tried to show his camera, but it's not showing up. I'll take it with whoever is available now. So before everybody leaves. Okay. Not. Thank you, not. And then okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, let's take it. Let's take 1, 2, 3. Let's see. One more.
you just might have to Photoshop a few images in and out.
We have done that before.
I believe it. Okay, well, I hope everyone found this of interest. It sure is of interest to me, because I finally found, after years and years of fiddling around with trying to get the depth right, why it's important and the effect that it has on the bottom line. So I do hope that this is something that we're able to now go ahead and make into something that people will be able to use.
Okay. Gerard, thank you very much. Javier and Phil, thank you very much. First, an apology from me. When we set up this meeting, there were things that I did not envisage that there will be a conflict. So I joined this meeting a little bit late, even though we started it early, because of some other conflicts. So my apologies. For everyone, just a few housekeeping updates. I want to appreciate all the support we've had from all the members of the SIG. It's been a hard work for all those who've been working, whether with either with contributions to the newsletter or the input to SPPRMS. I really appreciate all the support. With everything, with every organization, we have to grow, we have to move on. And also, so the time some of us have spent as officers on this SIG is coming to a close. So we're going to a period of transition. And so within this period to the end of the year, we'll be transiting to having new officers. I will appreciate those who volunteer to help and help officiate and also lead these SIG. So if you want to, please, just as we talked about Herald, please send us an indication that you want to help. But meanwhile, Javier, who has been coordinating the meeting today, will take up the position of the new president for the SPWLA Hydrocarbon Resources SIG. So I want us to welcome him. He's not new, but he's somebody who has been very dedicated. He's one of the founding members of this SIG, and I really appreciate all his support while I was leading for the last 2 years. So he will be taking over as the president. And for the other positions, we have positions for vice president. And some other 2 positions that we would like to fill. Please, if you have some time and you're interested, please let us know. Respond to either me or Javier, and then we can fill those positions. Critically, we need someone who will help us with the website. I know, Gray, you've been very helpful. If that's something you want to take up or another position, please, Brent, Gray, you've been very helpful with that aspect. Please let us know, and we want to fill those positions so that we can grow this SIG. So I want to just put that up front, and I appreciate all the support we've received so far. And we have a lot of work ahead of us, not just the paper. We have a work for the PRMS application updates, and we have looking forward to supporting SRMS and all the other aspects. We have a lot of work ahead of us, so we need help. I know it's a volunteer type of work, but we need a lot of support. And so if you have interest, please feel free to reach out so that we can fill those positions and we can move this SIG forward. Thank you very much. This was a very well-attended session. Herald, thank you so much. The passion you have for this position uncertainty is something we really appreciate. So thank you again. I don't want to keep people waiting, but thank you, and hope we can regroup. Those